Welcome to this episode of the ASQ podcast, where we focus on life, leadership, and culture. On today's episode, we're discussing the role of Machiavellianism in leadership and its effects on individuals and culture. Stay tuned. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm excited for another episode. You know, we kind of like do a little bit of research on this stuff, so it's kind of interesting to see how all this stuff works. You know, and how do you put it together, and how, you know, the beauty of kind of like just conceptualizing an idea and then putting it all together to come up with an episode. So
and this is a good topic,
sure,
because we've definitely had our experiences with people of this sort. So, but we're talking about Machiavellianism,
nice,
and the role that it plays with individuals and leadership.
Yeah.
Okay. And so I'm going to just start the episode with a quote, because we both read The Prince. You read it more recently. I read it a long time ago, so I don't remember everything, but I went through and I got this quote that I put together from The Prince. It says, "Mastering the art of leadership requires more than just strategic cunning. It demands a balance between Machiavellian savvy and ethical integrity. True leaders know that manipulation may win battles, but only trust and empathy win the war for lasting success."
Yeah.
I think that's a great.
Yeah, it's pretty cool actually. Now that I'm looking at it, right? Because there's I remember watching this documentary, a BBC documentary on Machiavelli, right? And then, you know, because that you always get that question, right? Would you much rather be loved than feared, right? And one of the answers, I think, that in the book it says is like that you much rather be loved, right? But fear also has its usefulness, right?
Exactly.
But I much rather be feared, right? And there's a
Much rather be loved, or much? You just said
you
want to
be loved, but you
right.
much rather be feared, because when you are fear, it's a very strong emotion, right?
Yeah,
it's a very powerful emotion.
Yeah.
And the idea of Machiavellism from the standpoint of Machiavelli, who wrote it, in the context of it all, he was writing it pretty much advocating for a job.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But he didn't get the job, and in fact, he was actually put in prison, and then he was outcasted from the city. Right. So it failed completely on what he was doing. Right. In terms of his intention of getting a job.
Yeah.
But the reality is that The Prince is all about gaining power and how to hold on to that power,
it, right?
But it goes down, and this is what I like this quote about: true leaders know that manipulation may win battles, but only trust and empathy win the wars for lasting success, right? So it boils down to that question: does the end justify the means, right? And it goes back to one of the themes that we always talk about, which is intentionality.
Correct.
What is the intention? Because power is not bad in and of itself, but it's the intention on how you use that power and for what reason.
What's the reasoning?
Right?
Yeah.
That you use that power.
Yeah. And
consequently, what is the and I think we're going to get really into in the episode is, what is the long-term effect or consequences of either the proper use or the misuse of that power?
Right.
That's the key.
That's good. Yeah.
Right? That's the key.
You said it better than I would have said it.
No, I mean,
you did good. But yeah, that is the key.
Yeah.
You're right. Because that's the whole thing, is that a lot of people do things and they're not necessarily thinking about the long-term consequences of the action or behavior or you know what I mean? They're just thinking, like you just posed the question, do the ends justify the means justify the end, right? And that's the whole thing. Yeah. A lot of people don't put thought into that concept. You know what I mean? Or that, and it's simple, but we just don't do it.
It's simple, but yet at the same token, it's very challenging, right?
Very.
Because it involves delaying gratification.
Right.
Right. I mean, it involves thinking not just in a temporary sense, right? But again, from a broader perspective, right? And that's the our limitations as human beings, right? Is seeing a limited perspective,
right?
And not being able to step out of our way of our own egos, right? To see the broader perspective,
Right.
from the standpoint of the interconnectivity of things and how things one thing may affect another.
That made me, for some reason, it makes me think of the pale blue dot.
Yes,
Very much, because you
Yes.
have to be able to step
away.
back and really think and have that perspective.
Yep.
And I don't know why that just kind of hit me, but yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So let's talk about what Machiavellianism is.
Mm-hmm.
So I know I think we both agree on what it is, right?
Well,
But-
to kind of clarify, right? If you look how to clarify, it's a strategy to gain and maintain power.
Power,
Right. That's the main premise of it all, right?
Yep.
And again, I'm not an advocate of not gaining power, because power is important,
Right.
right? It's the utilization of that power, and then back to the intentionality behind it,
Right.
that is important,
Right.
right? Because and again, from the individual standpoint, right, being able to advocate for yourself, right, be able to have a vision for your life and be able to work towards that vision and be able to achieve that vision requires a certain level of power, right? But also, consequently, an individual is a part of a whole, right? So that power-seeking behavior also needs to be able to be given a certain perspective as to either the benefit or the detriment of the whole,
Right.
right? So again, when you start looking at things from that point of view, right, it's really going back to what I've said before about, is it the desire to receive for myself alone, for my own individual gain or my immediate group, or is it a desire to receive so that it could benefit the whole? That's the interesting part about it, right? But again, it's like a lot of people think of Machiavelli as an evil perspective, right?
Right.
But in reality, it's a part of our nature.
It is, but it's all there. There are characteristics of Machiavellianism that are viewed as negative. The cunning behavior, the narcissism, manipulation, and things like that, right? But there's also the good side of the Machiavellian traits, right? Which is what you're alluding to.
Yeah.
You know, do the means justify the ends, right? Or is that how you say that?
Do the ends justify the means?
I just
or does
confused
the means
myself.
justify the ends?
The ends, right?
But here's the thing, right? Here's the thing that I find fascinating about all these things, right? I think of Nietzsche's book, Beyond Good and Evil, right?
What's that about?
Because good and evil are I think they're elementary ideas, right? They're very basic because they're very dualistic by nature, right?
Yeah.
This is good, this is evil, and there's nothing in between. Right. And we live in a society a lot of the times that we always look at either we're the good guys and the other person is the bad guys. Right. But I go back to that Game of Thrones quote, right? The villain is the hero of the other side.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So you got to look at it from the point of view that we have to look beyond what's good and what is evil. What's really important, right? What's really the key is what is the end? What is the vision for the end? Is the end, right? The end vision, is it going to be a benefit for the collective?
Right.
Or is it the benefit for the few or the one, right?
For the self, right.
Right. And you see this thought process, right? In ancient religion, in ancient concepts, you know, for instance, like the art of war. Right, you see this idea of you have to destroy your enemy, right? And you're not allowed to, but as a result, it's because of the collective is going to grow consistently, right? You can also be too oppressive. You can't be oppressive of your people, right? Because then you're stifling and you're building resentment, right?
Yeah.
So understanding the tactics of it all, it's important, right? And if you see a different point of view, a different perspective, right? Structure is important. You know, we can't have a functioning society without structure, right? But too much structure becomes an oppressive society, right? Right? Or in particularly in our interconnectedness now in our world, right? In a global economy type of stuff, right? And you see this happening if you look back enough, right? We are always looking for winners and losers, right? Again, that elementary idea of negative, you know,
good and evil,
right? We're competing So somebody has to always lose, right? And the consequence, we are oppressing other people, right? We put our well-being ahead of others, but consequently, it also affects us. Conversely. So when you start looking at the strategy of Machiavellianism, it's kind of like taking those traits, right, which are energies that are powerful and potent, right? That energy of conquest, that energy of power, that energy of gaining things, right? It's a very Aries type of energy, that impulse, that it's a natural energy. We can't deny the fact of its existence, right? But it's really, what is the application of it for?
Right.
What is the intentionality? That's the key, right? And we're gonna get into a good exercise that is really it's really an example of how that energy benefited a few at the consequence, not so much of the company itself, but how it affected an actual society. And you're going to see how that kind of like plays out in this stuff. So go ahead, keep going.
So thank you. That's actually a good like overview of that, because it really does talk about power and the ends. All of that is really good. So in the context of leadership, Machiavellianism, it kind of it comes up in different ways. Yes. It reveals itself in different ways. I'm just trying to come up with the word, because there are not, like you said, it's not all bad, because Machiavellian people with those traits are strategic thinkers naturally.
Yes.
And so we're going back to the whole thing of how we apply that strategic thinking and what is the point and what's the intention and whatnot. So I think that it's good to talk about like some examples of that. Just to kind of put it into like practical, storyline, I guess, if you will.
Yeah.
So,
and again, some of those traits are they're tools that need to be used.
The strategic thinking.
Yeah. You're thinking about strategic thinking, right? So, it's interesting, right, that you mentioned it, because there's a test, right? Is your level of Machiavellism, right?
You did that, didn't
you? Yes. We both did it. Yeah. And it's interesting to see, right? Because I think I have a pretty low Machiavellism score. I think it's like 4 or 5 out of a 10 spectrum, right? But there are things, strategic thinking, there's planning, foreseeing, and kind of like projecting ahead.
It's almost like somebody had told me once when we were talking about Machiavellianism, it's almost like playing chess.
Yes.
Because you have to think about, which was what we just talked about. We have to think about the end. Where am I going? And play your pieces accordingly, right?
Yeah.
Which is
and it's interesting though. On a side note, right? I'm looking for somebody to teach me how to play Go, which is an ancient Chinese game, and it's actually a more ancient than chess, and it's actually a lot more strategic, because again, in Go, in chess, you start with pieces on the table, right? In Go, you start with absolutely nothing, right?
Oh, and you just gain.
And the goal is to gain the most territory, right? So it's a very strategic. It kind of like resembles more of life, because in life you just really don't start with anything. It's kind of like how you utilize what you got.
I want to play that.
Yeah, I mean, but it's a very interesting. In fact, actually, but this is all completely a side note, right? In fact, this is the strategy that the Vietnamese used in order to get the outcome that they got during the Vietnam War. Yeah. So it was interesting, because it wasn't about, they had a lot more casualties than the U.S. ever did. But at the end, their objective, right? The intention that what their objective was achieved.
Right.
Yeah. And at the consequences, right? Like the U.S. had to withdraw. And then if you hear the conversation in the general, it's like, we didn't have as many casualties as they did. Right.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, the strategy that they used was to get
more people.
It was their intention. And again, you have to look beyond good and evil, because look how polarizing the Vietnam War was for the United States. And it really started turning purposefully when it came to public opinion. Right.
Yeah.
That's when the war and people going against the war started gaining. And this was a strategy of the Vietnamese, and they said it clearly. And that has more to do with Go than it has to do with chess. So I just wanted to put that on the side note, because strategies are important. So when you're talking about Machiavellism and the ideas behind planning several steps ahead, thinking about what the next move and what the entertainment is, sacrificing, right? In order to actually be able to gain stuff, putting your all these are strategies. Right? That from a point of view look evil, right? But it also is important to understand the key of it all is the intention behind it. That's the key.
Right.
What is the intention?
I think when people are exercising these types of behaviors, it kind of I just thought I might be going a little bit off. I'm still in line with what we're talking about here. But one thing that I was just thinking about, and it just came to me, is like how sometimes people will start with a good intention. Okay. Because you're saying intention is important, and it is. We talk about this frequently, right? But what happens, I think what is interesting to me is that people might start with a good intention, and they've sort of planned out, like, if I do this, and they use that strategic planning and decision making to make good decisions and so on and so forth. But at some point, I think sometimes people lose their way and they end up doing something that they don't realize they're doing. Does that make sense? Where they're alienating people, or they're doing what you said, where they're like they're I can't come up with the words, but for some reason I'm not coming up with words today, but where they are on this mission to do something right, where they think they're doing it, but then all of a sudden something small happens and they start to alienate people or manipulate people or drive people into a different direction. Do you understand what I mean by that? I
completely agree. So see, here's the thing, in my opinion, right? This is my opinion. So I just gave you like an idea for an episode that we're going to be doing soon, right? It's called The Fallacy of First Impressions. Right. That's going to be one of the things that we're going to talk about.
Can't wait to talk about that.
And the example that comes to my mind right off the bat of talking about this is Fidel Castro.
Okay.
Right? That's one of the examples to talk about. Because I don't think, yes, the road to perdition is filled with good intentions, right? But the idea is, or the premise of what I'm trying to say is, situations, right, reveal the true intentions of people. Right. They could say all this stuff, right? People say a lot of beautiful things that paint this beautiful picture. Right. And we gotta wait. We gotta judge super slowly. We gotta get on the bandwagon super slowly.
Like cautiously.
And the reasons being is because people will tell you what they will paint a picture for you. They will tell you this is that your beautiful thing of this is going to happen, but their true intentions reveal themselves not in the words, but in their actions.
Their actions, yeah.
And that's the thing that is challenging about all this stuff, right? That's why I look at people and I don't really care what they look like. And I've learned this. It's like I really want to see what truly happens. What are their actions?
So you're observing.
Because you have to observe, because the reality of the fact is, like, people are really good. Again, this is one of the things that Machiavelli talks about. You have to understand. You have to be able to spot the fox.
Yeah.
Right?
That's good. Yeah.
That's what he says. Like, you have to be able to, you have to be able to spot it and be able to be like a lion to be able to tame it. Right? And then you have a lot of people that paint you these beautiful pictures. And it happens in any organization, any industry, any country, or anything. That's why Fidel Castro kind of like comes to mind, because he painted a beautiful picture. And at first, the intention was like, okay, all right, we want to make sure that there's gangsters out of Cuba. We want to make sure that people have rights and all this stuff. But it didn't turn out to be so at all, right? It was all about his ego, his self-aggrandizement, and all this stuff. Right. It's the same thing that happened in Russia, in the Soviet Union. That's why I love that movie, the book Animal Farms, right? Yeah. Because it kind of like depicts truly what's inside the individual. Now, every person has that potential, right? And the reasons why this happens so often, right, it's because we don't really take the time to truly get to know who we are, right? Our tendencies.
So that is where I was trying to go. So I think that's what happens is when you don't allow yourself to discover your shadow, which is what we just talked about, the dark side of yourself, because we all have it. Yes. All of us have it.
All of us.
I mean, there's no way that anybody could tell me that they have not used manipulation in some way, or they haven't been cunning in some way. You know what I mean? We've all done it. And if you say you haven't, okay.
Babies are born with it.
Exactly.
What do you think? It's like crying and we just have a granddaughter.
Manipulation.
And it's just crying. It's like, I want some food right now. I'm going to do this.
I don't care what you're doing. I want a bottle.
I want attention right now.
Yeah.
So it's like, again, we got to start looking at things beyond good and evil. And we have to start looking at, okay, what is the intention behind this, right? And then what's the long-term result of this intention, right? It's but it really takes understanding and being honest about what we humans are, right? We are sophisticated animals. That's truly what we are, right? This is really, really what we are, right? But we could do a lot more. We could do a lot of good if we truly understand what our shadow and the dark side is, right? What Machiavelli really, truly said is like you can't really live in this world, and it's the same thing that Nietzsche mentioned. And there's a lot of that you can't live in this false idea of the only nature and the only thing is to be good, right? And again, that's a very elementary, polar way of doing who you are, looking at good and looking at evil, right? It's like you can't look at the world in that direction, right? And you can't look at the world just like, oh, I'm good. But
how do you think though how do you think that people can change that way of viewing? I think it's like you're saying that, well, you can't do that. You can't, but what's the practical way of stopping that sort of perspective or that lens, removing that lens and looking at things differently? What do you think that is? Because I'm thinking about it and I'm like, gosh, that could be hard for a lot of people who are not maybe willing or just don't know how, or they want to, but they don't know how.
See, the original role of, let me go back to this example, right? And I'm not going to use this example, but it's the perfect example.
Don't do
it. And it's that example of Jesus, the 40 days and the 40 nights, Buddha, in the day, sitting in the tree and being tempted.
Okay.
Right? The temptations of power, the temptations of ego, the temptations of, the hedonism, right? For lack of a better term. Those are things, right, that you have to be able to see within themselves, just like they did, right? And recognize that you could make the choice to do all those things, and people have. Look around you.
Oh yeah,
right.
Happens.
But what happens is what they realize, which is something that we have to realize, and this was really the intention of those founding fathers of all those religions and spiritual teachings, is to see the correlation between the individual and the whole. Right. That we are made in God's image, right? So if we're all made in God's image or whatever, the universe, right, that we are all a part of the whole, right? That we might feel isolated or individually, but whatever we do affects others.
Right.
And affects everything. The earth is not just simply a collection of individuals. It's a totality of individuals. It's an organism. Is a living organism, and we are part of it. Right. And this is when if I criticize religions, it's like this is the right religion. This is like I think the social conditioning of modern religions, in which separated us, from each other and nature, right? And calling cultures in which they were part of nature, right? It starts there. It starts in that separation, right? And people could say, "Well, it's because of original sin." It's like, no, you're reading it wrong. But I don't want to get into all that. Yeah. But the idea is that we are social conditioned, right, to see things as separate. Right? Because of our color of our skin, because we're different. We are because of this. It's like you and I are separate, and we are unable to see the unity on the correlationship between the two, right? And if I defy anybody to tell me that this is not what Jesus was talking about, that this is not what Muhammad was talking about, this is not what Buddha was talking. I defy anybody to tell me otherwise, right? Because the reality is that. The reality that ultimately, whatever choices I've made in my life has ripple effects.
Of course.
And a lot of people don't feel and don't believe that because their lives seem insignificant in comparison to the social structure that we've created. My life doesn't mean anything.
Right.
Whatever I do doesn't matter.
Right.
So that we become either nihilistic or we become hedonistic. Right. That desire to receive for ourselves alone. They're both end of the spectrum, but it's the same thing. Right. And that takes a lot of introspection.
Mm-hmm.
That takes a lot of emotional intelligence and being truly self-aware.
Definitely.
It takes a lot of pain. I'm not saying that it's going to be an easy road, but it's a road that you have seen. But again, I challenge anybody, look around you.
Yeah.
And then you look around it, and if you look at it from the point of view of seeing either a corporation or the company just for the desire for themselves, at the consequence and destruction of everything around them. And we're going to get into this example because the example that we got for this is like one of the best examples that I have found when it comes to this.
Which example is this one?
Jack Welch.
Okay, go ahead. Talk about Jack Welch. I thought you were going to talk about some other ones, but let's talk about Jack.
I don't want to talk about Steve Jobs. I don't want to talk about all
good
of
old
that.
Jack.
So good old Jack, right? So
prime example.
Yeah. So there was a book, and there's actually I saw it also on YouTube. That is and it's an example of how an individual, right, changes not just the scope of a company, right, but the scope of a society,
right,
and consequently the scope of how the world operates.
Right.
So Jack Welch was the CEO of General Electric, right, which no longer is in existence as a consequence of his choices, right? So
this is really a good example.
It is a perfect example of it all, right? So he is the subject of like a recent book, right? It's called from David Gales. It's called "The Man Who Broke Capitalism," right? And there's another one. And there's another book that is like really interesting too. It's called William Cohen's "The Power of Failure." Right. Oh, okay. So what Jack Welch is, he has this particular, and Jack Welch is one of the most prominent leadership developers, right? And a lot of the CEOs and a lot of the big companies that operate right now and teach this leadership from nonprofits and they use his leadership style, right? And his leadership style is very simple. It's his intention, right? His intention, which is something that GE, prior to him taking over, the GE didn't operate like this. GE was a Fortune 500 company, one of the top companies in the world, right? They partnered up with Edison. They created a lot of things, refrigerators, TVs, everything that modernized the American culture, right, as we know it. And consequently, the world, when it came to technology and research and development and innovation, all this stuff, GE was it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And they were more concerned. Their intentions at that time was really, really, obviously, profit making, right? Because it is capitalism to make profit. But it was a modest type of profit because also their intention was to better the standard of living of people, which they did. Yeah. Right? Yeah. They employed a lot of people in America, in particular in the Midwest, and a lot of these big industrial areas, right? Industrial areas. And good old Jack took over.
Good old Jack.
Right? And his intention shifted. His intention was capitalism and business. It's about maximizing profit. Right?
Yeah.
Damn the consequences. Damn society. My job as a business owner, right? Again, that desire to receive for the self alone.
For the self, yeah.
Right? It's maximizing profit.
So his intention
wasn't about this innovative thing, this idea of bettering the world, right? Through innovation, through creativity, and consequently making money, right? It was about, I have to do whatever it takes to maximize my amount of money, right? Needless to say, I just kind of like summarize, and you guys could take a look at all this stuff, right? Is that he changed GE from an innovative technological company into a financial company.
Correct.
Right? By the time he retired with $241 billion or something like that, right? A couple of years later, GE went out of business. They had to break everything apart, right? Now, the thing that is so damaging about what he did is that, again, the short-term consequences, he made people a lot of money. Right? A lot of money. He made himself a lot of money. And he used this what do you call it? This technique, right? Which you see happening a lot now. It was called, I gotta find it again because I always keep forgetting the name of it. Hold on, I'll tell you right now what it is. It's called rank and yank.
Ah, yes.
Right?
Yes.
So you take that spectrum, right? So every year, right? He fired 10% of the working force,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because again, his job is maximize profit. So 10% are obsolete, right? And I want you to think about that premise, right? Because I've seen this in nonprofits.
Right.
I've seen this in nonprofits, right? What happens in a society when we call 10% of the population obsolete?
I mean,
where are we going to put them?
Yeah.
What happens?
What happens to them?
And consequently, if you really think about it, look at the homeless situation that we have in America. Look at the housing situation, because his mentality is so powerful because it is taught.
It literally is in organizations.
It is taught organizations. It is taught and maintained by the top companies that we use in our country. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not a socialist by any means of or I don't have an ideology when it comes to political agendas. But the intention, what is the intention of all the stuff that we do? Because again, let's look beyond good and evil, right? Socialist capitalism. Let's look at beyond all that. What is the intention behind those two things, right? Is it to better the quality of life of all individuals?
Right.
Or better the quality of life of a few.
A few.
Right? And this has always been the fight between labor and capital. Right? That's always been the fight between labor and capital. But when you do something like that, in the big scheme, perspective-wise, in the long-term consequence of it, what is the consequence of the rank and yank?
Right.
Right? It's pretty interesting.
Sounds pretty awful. That even the title is like.
Now, do I agree that certain people don't fit in certain places?
Of course.
Absolutely. I mean, that's true. I mean, I'm not an engineer, so don't put me being an engineer. It's like, we're gonna, the windows of a plane are gonna come out. Sorry, I just had to throw that in there. The doors of a plane are gonna come out, but
we're not gonna talk about that.
But the idea, it shows you, right, that it doesn't matter the strategy, right? It's the intention truly that matter. And think about the consequence of what Jack Welch did, right? You and I kind of like took a road trip, right, to the Rust Belt. Remember? All those factories, Tonker factories, all these factories empty, gone, right? Completely disseminating the middle class.
Oh, yeah. There was that eliminating.
Yes, destroying.
Intents and purposes,
destroying the backbone of America. Right?
And what happens to those middle class people? What happens to that?
Okay, well, like, there's a consequence when people can't find jobs. What do they turn to?
I mean,
they turn to drugs. Look at the opiate. It's like everything correlates.
The sociological impact that it has, even on the people who are benefiting.
Yes,
because it affects all of us.
Because if you get all this money, right?
And then we're angry because we see people that are homeless and begging for money. And we're angry because we see drug addicts. We're angry because we see people turning to alcoholism. We're angry about those things. And I'm not saying those things are right.
No.
But what's the cause and effect?
It's one person.
Yeah.
Now, again, this is a recent example, but there's been many others throughout history, right? That you could see how the intentionalities of certain individuals really, truly affects the outcome.
Yeah.
Not just of the individual, but the the organization, but how it affects all of us, like the country and the world.
Right.
How all that stuff affects, right? Yeah. And there's no denying that as a consequence of it, we have look at the mental health crisis that we're going through, not just in the States, but throughout the world,
all over.
Right? We have this idea, right, of this desire to receive just for some. I'm stealing. That's not my own making. This is Kabbalistic terms, right? The desire to receive for the self alone, right? And when you start looking at all that stuff, you could start really, if you really step back enough, you can start seeing and you reach back. And again, when I talked about those books that, like I mentioned with Mr. Cohen and all that, you could start really facing back and seeing, oh man, oh okay, oh man, right?
Yeah. And
now some people might question, well, people need to work hard enough, and it's like I don't deny that, but it's like, can you really deny the fact that there's a lot of hard-working Americans, blue-collar workers, right? Yeah. Decimated, their lives destroyed. They had to adjust. I mean, they adjusted and still, but because
hopefully
one individual looked at 10% of the people every year.
One person affecting.
Right? And people follow without questioning.
Yeah, of course.
And the ones that did were outcasted.
Yeah.
You know, so, but the idea is that when you start looking at concepts like, you know, Machiavellianism, and you start looking at all this stuff, it's got to look at it from the point beyond what, you know, what looks superficially as good or evil.
Mm-hmm.
It's really looking at the intentionality of it all.
Mm-hmm.
What is the intention?
Mm-hmm.
What is the objective
at
the end of it all? Is the objective like the objective that, again, GE gave us electricity. They gave us the light bulb.
I know.
Right? They gave us the ability to be able to watch TV, to put a refrigerator in our home so we could all have, like, you know, our food wouldn't go bad.
Yeah.
Right? But then, you know, everybody adored Jack Welch. He was just on top of everything. But we failed to really look, right, beyond the fallacy of that first impression, to really look at the long-term consequences of what he's done.
Yep.
And now what we're seeing is nonprofits, one of my beloved nonprofits that I work for, following this man's strategy, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Without them thinking, without really looking introspectively and saying, okay, what is the intention?
Yeah. And there are consequences that have already been noted, and it's just, people are just blinders, you know, they're just doing. And I mean, I've worked in organizations like that. Most recently, I've worked in an organization like that where this person is just, what's the intention?
That is.
It's not even something that is communicated. You know what I mean?
Yep.
But you see it in the behavior, and the people that are drinking the Kool-Aid, the people that are on board and not saying anything when they know they should. There are a lot of people that are being affected by this. There's a lot of anxiety and stress, and a lot of people that are you're talking about mental health, the culture of fear that's created as a result of that. I could lose my job if I say something. I could do this. I could do that. And there are some people that have been brave and they've said things, and there are some that are just like, nope, just going to keep just like, you know, I know you've had an experience where somebody said, man, I got to feed my family. I got it. I need my job. Yeah. So I don't care who he's trampling all over or she's trampling all over. I'm going to let it happen because I got to get mine.
Yeah. As the consequence of everything else. And
I know we can keep talking about this, so I know we got to wrap it up.
Yeah, I know. But let me finish it with this little example and we'll wrap it up, right? So there's an anecdote, right? About the Medici family. I think that's the one that Machiavelli, the Medici family, the prince, right? He was trying to. This was the one that he's trying to get him a job, right? So he does this thing in which he wanted to make sure that the situation was squashed at a place, right? So he sent this guy in, and this guy was brutal, right? And then the prince went in, and then in front of the whole town, right, cut up the guy's head and just kill him, right? And this is kind of graphic, but again, there's a point to be made, right? Because his intention was to be able to have control, but also make sure that people were not oppressed, right? Exactly. So that he's able to be loved, you know, because that's a tactic, right? Making somebody the scapegoat so that he looks good, but at the same token, he maintains power, but everybody prospers.
But everybody
all at the same
else
time, right?
Yep.
And I'm not condoning that, you know, being able to do those type of things.
Right.
But the intention was prosperity for his town, right? And also prosperity for himself. So it's like, it's not that you can't have both.
You can have both.
Right? It's not that. That's not the intention. That's not the point, right? The point of capitalism, and again, it's like we almost live in a society in which we can criticize it, right? On its extremist on the extremist outcomes that it could produce, right? Because it's one thing to say that we compete, but it's another thing to compete fairly.
Oh yeah,
you know, it's like that's the part, and then you know, most people think that we live in an honest, true meritocracy, but the reality is that we do not. No, you know, some things are skewed, and again, I'm not saying advocating to the replacement of capitalism, but it's like really looking at it from the point of view. Okay, what is our intention with it?
Yeah. And I'm glad you said that, because that's kind of how I was going to finish this anyways, is, you know, how do we balance Machiavellianism and, you know, those traits in leadership, right? And I know practically speaking, it's about emotional intelligence, having self-awareness and whatnot. But I think that more so from an individual perspective is really having the desire to really get to know who we are and really discovering those traits, you know, that shadow side and dealing with those traits. And I think that because I've just been doing that over the last couple of years, especially since I was in school and got my, you know, my degree in leadership and really got into these theoretical, you know, theories about leadership and whatnot and learning things and really seeing people for what they are.
Yes.
And knowing that some of these people, you know, I look at them and I'm not saying I'm the expert, but I kind of have studied this for a long time, the lack of emotional intelligence and the lack of willingness to understand the power that we all have.
Correct.
We all have this immense power. And if it's not tamed, it can destroy. And that's ultimately what we're saying from this whole thing. And so this is a good episode just because I feel like we could talk about this again. I know we can keep going and going, and we have to cut it short. But
and then to end this, right? I will kind of like use because I know he uses it for the individuals, right? This phrase, but I think it's pertinent, right? Because I think this is something that we all have to collectively and individually, we all have to recognize it. And we have to stop BSing or bullshitting ourselves like, oh, we're always so good. We're so good, right?
Exactly.
We're always good. It's and this is a Jordan Peterson line that he uses. I'm not don't know the exact word, but he goes like this. It's like become a monster, right? And then tame it, being able to control it, right?
Becoming a monster.
Become a monster and be able to control it, right?
Okay.
It's like it's the same premise as Jesus saying, Peter, put up your sword.
Okay.
It's kind of like the thing. It's not about the power. It's about understanding that you have that potential for destruction.
Yeah.
And then be able to put up your sword, right? That's the thing. And it takes a lot of realization to say, oh, shit. Because then this goes against everything that you've been conditioned to think about, everything that you have been taught to think about, everything that, oh my God, this is Darwinism 101. I'm supposed to. That's not Darwinism. That's not what he said. No. It's not survival of the fittest. It's survival of the most adaptable.
Exactly.
You know, and that's the thing that's misunderstood. It's like it's pretty interesting.
Well, people like to define things in their own ways to make it fit into their
because
world.
Of our desire to receive for ourselves alone.
Thank you for tuning into this episode. If you're ready for meaningful personal growth and transforming your business or organization, visit us at asqempowermentservices.com.